Welcome to this month's episode of Picture of Health. I'm your host, Lauren Lingell. On today's show, we're going to learn about a serious and relevant crime which could be happening in our own community. Sex trafficking occurs when a trafficker uses force, fraud, or coercion to control another person to engage in sex acts against his or her own will. Today in studio, I'm joined by Michelle Newsom, the Porch Director of Community Relations. The Porch is a program that rescues and restores child victims of domestic sex trafficking. Michelle, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been with Porch for a while now.
Since the inception, yes.
Okay.
2014.
Well, it is so nice to have you here and
Thank you.
to learn about this. But before we dive into what the Porch is, why don't you tell me how you got connected with this organization and what drew you to this type of work?
Okay, well, let me tell you just a little bit about myself as far as a history. I actually was a victim myself of child sexual abuse as a young girl growing up. And, so in my adult life, I got involved with law enforcement. I actually became a police officer, worked for the Lakeland Police Department, and retired from there after 24 years of service. And during that time, I spent most of my time working sex crimes and child abuse cases, and was working with offenders as far as making those criminal cases where, again, victimizing these young children, and helping with the state attorney's office prosecution and so forth. But it was during that time I found a fascination working with these offenders and just, learning about them. So I actually went back to school and got my degree in mental health counseling. And part of my internship was twofold. I was working with groups with sex offenders and sexual predators as doing group therapy with them, mental health counseling. And then I was also doing internship at the Florida Baptist Children's Homes. And there I was working with victims there in the emergency shelter who had been placed there by Department of Children and Families, removed from their homes, with many of them too having being victims of sexual or physical abuse. So you kind of see how all of this tied together. Again, being able to work both sides, working with that offender and sharing with them about abuse and how that victim is affected by their behavior and their actions. And then working with victims, overcoming that and them, asking those tough questions as to why. Why me? Why did this happen? And I was able to answer some of those questions based on my work with the offenders and talking to them about why. So just tying all of this in together was just an awesome opportunity. But when it was during that time, this is like 2014, the Florida Baptist Children's Homes was looking at opening up a safe home for girls who had been rescued and removed from sex trafficking. They had passed, legislation had passed the Safe Harbor Act in 2012, and the Department of Children and Families, the secretary there, he had called or texted Dr. Haig, who is the president of the Florida Baptist Children's Homes, and they were friends, and he actually texted him and said, hey, they've passed this legislation, and would you be interested in opening up a safe home for these children? And of course, at that time, everything was new. There wasn't even a definition or any kind of guidelines for what is a safe home. But obviously, the Children's Homes has been around for 112 years, and that's what we do, is we help one more child. So this was just another opportunity to get involved. So they started doing the research and looking at what that looks like, what that entails, buying the property, kind of marketing the name, the Porch Light. And they had reached out actually to me because I had done and was working with them doing my internship for my master's degree, and reached out, and of course with my law enforcement career asked if I would be interested in following up and coming to work there with them. So I had retired from the police department and then went there to the Florida Baptist Children's Homes, and we opened up the Porch Light in October of 2014. It's been a ride, and we've learned a lot, but it's been exciting and doing some really, really great things there.
So after hearing all of that, obviously I learned about your program, but kind of in awe of you a little bit, because most people, you know, they don't immerse themselves into something that's, you know, like happened to them. They kind of deny it or whatever, but you try to like help other people. And so I don't know if that was intentional, how you kind of grew into this profession, but I think it looks really cool how you have this heart for.
Well, I think I read this in a book somewhere, or somebody told me that it's kind of from your deepest pain comes your ministry. And that really spoke to me, because you really think about, you know, some of these people that have done great things, and, you know, we all go through things in our lives, but if you can turn those things around and make a positive out of it, you know, good can come from it. So I think that's really what I've done is, you know, taken that, you know, that abuse that occurred to me and then turned it around and just educating people as to, you know, I just remember parents, you know, when I was doing some of these sex crimes investigations, and they would like, that wouldn't happen to my kid, or I would know, or they would tell. And honestly, speaking from experience, I could tell you that that's not true.
Yeah.
They don't tell. And there's reasons, you know, there's blame and there's shame and there's guilt and there's all of those different things that person's experiencing. And so they don't come forth and just share all of that stuff. So, but you know, you can turn that around and use it for good.
Well, I'm glad that you're in our community and that you did.
Thank you.
So let's get on to educating then. So what exactly is sex trafficking or human trafficking, or the difference between the two? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think your intro was great as far as hitting some of those highlights. You know, you hear that term human trafficking, and human trafficking is just kind of that umbrella term, because underneath that falls all these different types of trafficking. And the two major ones that you hear are the sex crimes, or sex trafficking, or the human trafficking can also mean labor trafficking. So there's different types of trafficking. But again, at the Porch Light, what we're working with are these children that have been sexually exploited. So when you hear me say, you know, we're talking today specifically about sex trafficking, that's because that's the population of the girls that we serve at the Porch Light. But you talked about force, fraud, and coercion, and that's a big part of that legal definition, as you know, when you're trying to prove in a court of law, you know, that someone has been forced or through lies and manipulation that they've been exploited, taken advantage of. So those are some of those elements of the crime that you have to prove, although for children you don't have to prove that. Children are children and they can't consent to have, you know, a sexual relationship.
Right. So can you give me just a very, like, I don't want to say like a dumbed down definition, but just a really
Absolutely.
Simple definition of sex trafficking.
Simple definition that I use for just generally human trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerable people for some type of gain. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry, so people are making a lot of money, and a lot of it is about money. But anything exchanged of value, you know, whether I am, you know, it may be in exchange for drugs, it may be in exchange for food or clothing or a place to live, but anything where there's an exchange of a sexual act for something of value is human trafficking.
So can you sort of craft a scenario to help explain how this sex trafficking would actually take place?
Well, I can give you some examples of what we've seen in our home, some of the girls that have been in our home. The population that we said I serve are girls ages 12 to 17. We know the average age of girls is 12 to 14. But understand too, as I'm again speaking of girls because that's the population we serve, boys are trafficked too.
Absolutely.
Okay, and adults are trafficked too. It's not just children and it's not just girls. So we want to make sure that we're clear. The girls that we serve in our home generally come from that foster care background where Department of Children and Families has been involved in some way. But we have recently taken some community kids in our care and providing services for them. So again, those vulnerability factors that you look at. But what we have seen a lot of times is that older boyfriend. You know, that older male, he's maybe 20s, 30s, just he's older, and you've got this young girl, 12, 14, teenager. What we're seeing mostly in our home right now, and the trend in Florida is kind of that 15, 16 years of age, that age. But what they do is they befriend these girls, and you know, girls, people in general are trying to meet a need. You know, they want to fit in, they want to belong, they want to be loved, and those vulnerability factors, some of them, and one of the biggest ones is like lack of self-esteem. You know, so you know that adolescent age anyway is awkward, and you know, it's trying and difficult, but you know, so these guys befriend them, and they come up and maybe say, oh, you're so pretty, and you should be a model, and you should do this, and we can take pictures, and we can make a portfolio, or, you know, it may be that promise of something better, you know, oh, this is happening at home, I can offer you this better life, or I can enroll you in school, or, you know, they just make all of these promises that they never intend to fulfill, but these children or people are buying into those lies, and so they just, it's almost like a dating relationship. You know, they buy them things, they take them out to eat, they get their hair done, they get their nails done, and then the next thing you know, they think they're in love with this person, that's my boyfriend. Well, then, you know, he's doing all of these really nice things, they think that they're in love with him, he tells them he's in love with them, and so then at some point, it changes. And it may be that he says, well, you know, I'm running a little low on cash this week or this month, and I can't pay my car payment. And I know a way to make some really quick money. And so he kind of interjects some of those thoughts and ways to get some fast money. And you maybe can have some type of sex act with my friend or with this person, or maybe introduces a strip club scenario. And these girls don't really want to do that, but they love him, and they don't want to let him down. And he's done all these nice things for me, so I owe him. You know, so that's how they just move from that piece to the next. And then when they take that first step and they do that act, or, you know, sometimes there's videos, whether these guys will take videos, or they'll, you know, take pictures. And then once they've done it the first time, then they hold those pictures and those videos and those things over their heads and say, well, if you don't do this, then I'm going to show this video. I'm going to post this on social media. I'm going to, you know, expose you and what you've done. So now they feel trapped, you know, and that's where they're using that, you know, force, fraud, and coercion again. They're manipulating these children and adults to do these things by, you know, holding that over their heads. They threaten them, you know, threaten to harm them, threaten to harm their families, you know, threaten to harm their pets. I mean, we work with a victim's survivor advocate, and that was kind of her story, that they had raised rabbits in their home, and they actually gutted the rabbit in front of her and said, you know, if you don't do this, this was what we will do to your sister.
Oh, goodness.
So, and again, as children, you know, they don't know what options are out there.
Right.
And they feel partly to blame because now I've been taken advantage of. But I'll also tell you too many times that these children and adults don't recognize that they've been exploited. Again, that's my boyfriend. We also see in our house family where maybe that parent is the trafficker because that parent has an addiction, and therefore I need to get some money. So I'm selling my child, get that money, buy the drugs to support my habit. So you're seeing that. We've seen that in our home. Or it may be even that grandparent who's trafficking their grandchild because that grandparent's on a fixed income, I have to pay my rent, and I don't have any money.
And are these based on true scenarios?
These are true scenarios, what we have seen in our home.
Oh my goodness. Is there any place where, you know, I guess, are there places that you can identify where a victim is more vulnerable besides foster care? Or, I mean, I'm talking about like, you know, just leaving a store or something like that.
Any place where people gather, the mall, the movies, playgrounds. But the thing is, you know, live these sporting events, football games, Super Bowl, Bike Week, all of those places where large group of people come in, large group of men come in. They're talking about supply and demand.
Right.
But they will actually bring in girls, women, boys, men, to be trafficked for these purposes. But it's really any place that people gather. And we've talked about these victims and who they are. Boys, girls, men, women are being trafficked. Well, who are these traffickers? It's the same thing. It's boys, girls, men, and women. It's children, it's adults, it's grandparents. So it's hard to fathom that this really happens. But I mean, children are actually trafficking other children.
Oh my goodness.
I've read a story, and I've seen it happen in our home where, they will traffic another child, for the purpose of making money off of that child. But there was a story in Minnesota where a teenage cheerleader in high school was actually, trafficking her teammates, and she ended up, being arrested and was sent to federal prison. But yeah.
That's
Teens.
unheard of.
Yes.
We're going to take a break now.
Okay.
When we get back, we'll talk more about this.
Great.
Stay tuned. We're with Michelle Newsom, and we'll have more when we come back.
Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Whitney Fung, and I work with the University of Florida IFAS Extension Service and the Board of County Commissioners Indigent Healthcare Division. So we've been talking a lot about some really great tips, especially from My Plate, from the dietary guidelines. That's a consumer message for anybody to have a healthy diet. So check out choosemyplate.gov if you haven't already. We are on the last tip of the 10 tips. We are on tip number 10, drink water instead of sugary drinks. And that's the reason why I have all those things right here in front of me. And so we want to encourage more water consumption because how many calories does it have? 0 calories. There's calorie free, and a lot of times, we can kind of consider it to be free, right? And so if it's tap water, if you want to boil it, it can kind of be free. But your other drinks, you're spending a lot of money buying drink after drink, and it could be pretty pricey if you have a big family. One thing is I personally hate buying soda at the restaurant because it's like $2.50, just for a drink when you could buy it at home or even the vending machine, because the $1, $2 that adds up and it counts on your calories. And so when I'm counting my calories, the drinks just sometimes it's not worth it for me. So water is kind of the best bet because it's 0 calories, and that's what we want to focus on. Drinking more water if you can. And so if you are buying your drinks, there's a lot of ways to be able to cut down on those sugary drinks. The majority of the sugar consumption that we consume is from those energy drinks, the sodas, so Gatorade or Monster if you drink those things, sweet tea, even that, any type of drinks, because we don't realize how many calories there really are. And you could be drinking, the whole half gallon if you're watching a movie or something like that. So, whatever drinks you like to drink, look at the sugar. Every 4 grams is a teaspoon of sugar. So if you think about a can of soda, you look at how many grams of sugar is in it, it's almost 10 teaspoons. And so if you spoon out 10 teaspoons of sugar, can you really imagine how much sugar you're consuming in 1 can of soda? And we don't always have that 1 can of soda. We have 20-ounce bottles, right? So that's almost double the amount of sugar. Or your 79 cents, 99 cents, I don't know how much Big Gulp at the gas station. And so all that is sugar. And so one way to cut back is perhaps if you buy a punch or a tea or something like that, you can water it down. If you like the fizzly carbonated drinks, try seltzer water, add some juice in it, add some herbs and fruit in it. Have you heard of fruit infused or herb infused water? Those are great. Adding limes, adding lemons, adding oranges, strawberries, mint. Those are always really good and still calorie free, and you might even have some vitamins in there as well. Juice. When you're buying juice, try to choose 100% fruit juice if you can. Because if it's 100%, you know that all that liquid comes from a real fruit. Of course, if you eat the real fruit, it's better because then you'll have the fiber. But if you drink juice, so if you give it to your kids, keep in mind there's a lot of sugar in that. There may or may not be added sugar. So if you're, Sunny D or Tampico or High C, things like that, it might not be from a real fruit, so it's really just sugar and water. And so one way to do it is just to add a little bit of water and maybe start weaning it off for your kids if possible. But if you can, do 100% fruit juice and then watching how much you consume, because that's calories and sugar. Other things, sweet tea. One little tip I like to use is do half and half. Unsweet tea mixed with sweet tea. If you can't do half and half, some people just really can't. So you could do 70-30, 80-20. Just start cutting down and you really get used to it. My worst sugar consumption is coffee. I am not going to cut out coffee because, you know, I need coffee to get through the workday. But one thing I started doing is cutting on the sugar. So I used to use 3 packs of sugar, but now I use 2. And then slowly on my second pack, I leave some left over in the pack and I throw it away. And then you just start getting used to it. And then when I have my favorite candy bar, my Snicker bar, it's just too sweet sometimes. So you'll really get used to it. And so there's small steps, one at a time. We've gotten through each of these 10 tips of my plate, hoping that, you know, we can start moving towards a healthy lifestyle for the rest of your life. We've talked a lot about the tips of eating healthier and just nutrition in general, so I hope that you will be able to go back on YouTube and watch all those 10 tips again. That's all we have today. It's the last tip. So the one thing that I do encourage you to do, again, as always, is to go on choosemyplate.gov. Check out that website, read through the University of Florida EDIS articles, and then as always, contact us at the Extension office if you have any more questions. Keep following us along because we'll have some more episodes on Nutritionally Speaking. Thank you for your time.
Okay, I started smoking when I was 12. I asked my mother permission for that, and she said as long as I could afford it, I could smoke if I could afford it. As the years went by, I started learning more and more. I quit when I was 45, and I started getting side effects after that. The bleeding in the bed, the pillows. In the night, I wake up, I could taste the blood in my mouth. I have to wake up and rinse my mouth. When I go to the dentist, just to remove one tooth. And they tell me that I have a disease in my mouth, and I have to remove all my teeth at my age. It was torture. It was torture. He said yes. He said it, but throughout the years, the cigarette was eating my gums. It was eating my bones of my teeth. And it was something I never realized. I lost my teeth very young, and I'm still going through it. I'm still going through the pain. I'm still going through the consequences, let's put it that way. And I think I will still be going through it through my life.
Each year, Florida drivers illegally pass school buses nearly 2 million times. Each illegal pass-by could result in a tragic injury or fatality of a student.
The inconvenience of an extra few seconds spent waiting for a stopped school bus is insignificant compared to the loss of a child's life.
School buses are safest when drivers obey all of our laws.
Remember, stop hurrying, keep ahead.
You need to think about, what do I need to be okay?
If you're not prepared, it can be chaos.
It was extremely scary knowing that I was actually in danger.
This is not in your control. Prepare yourself for whatever may happen.
Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Michelle Newsom, the Porchlight Director of Community Relations. The Porchlight's a program that helps child victims of domestic sex trafficking here in Polk County. So, Michelle, as we were talking about, what are some things that we can look at, that we can try to be mindful of, to look out for when some of these some girls are getting into these relationships that can become really not good trafficking situations? Or are there signs, is someone more withdrawn or something to that effect?
I would say there's lots of things that you can be aware of and look at, but be mindful that, it's not like a one thing automatically, oh, they're a victim.
Right.
It's just kind of like a culmination of things.
And let me just say, I don't think it's the victim's fault or anything
Absolutely
like that.
not.
It's just about, from the parent or guardian perspective, how can I teach my child to be safer?
Right. As far as teaching your children to be safe, I think as parents or guardians, it's important that we know who their friends are. It's also important to know where they're going and who they're going with, and just some of those, you would think, basic parenting skills, but that doesn't always happen.
Right.
And social media is huge as far as the internet, and because there's, internet can be great, it can be also very bad.
Exactly.
And know the passwords, know what your children are looking at on the internet, know who they are friending on Facebook. Go in there and look at their posts. Again, know their passwords. I think that is huge, because so much, I would say over half of the children that get involved with this are actually something online has spurred that on, some conversation who somebody has friended them, and have no idea who's on the other end of that.
Exactly.
I'm a 15-year-old girl, but I'm really a 60-year-old guy,
Yeah.
So you never know. But it's knowing just really what your children are doing, knowing their friends, knowing what they're going out, what they're doing when they're going out. And as far as signs and things that you're, as a parent or guardian, may be looking at is, is there a change in behavior? Has there been a change in music where maybe now it's more sexually suggestive? Is it the language? Because they are more sexually, verbally, talking about it. There may be, things that they're watching on TV. It might be, just things like that.
And that's got to be tough, especially in this
we do
over-sexualized
live in an
society.
over-sexualized society, but just again that change of behavior.
Right.
Really, are they coming home with a $500 purse, and you didn't buy it for them,
Right.
So where did they get that? Or they're getting their hair done or their nails done. How are they paying for that? If you didn't do it, who is? So that would be something. Signs of physical abuse. You may see bruises or different things like that, and inquire as to, well, what happened. It may be, again, children shouldn't have tattoos without some type of parental consent. So if you've not signed that parental consent, are they coming home with tattoos? Because these traffickers do brand. They will actually put their names and brand barcodes. They will even put barcodes on these children.
That is so disturbing.
Because again, they're a property that's a commodity. They are for sale. They're objectifying them. We literally, too, in our home, had one of our children come, and the name of their trafficker was all down their forearm. And when you think about trauma and abuse and that healing of that child, to look down there every single day and to see this guy's name tattooed on you, where he says that you belong to him and that you are nothing but property and you are how I make my money. So tattoos are huge. It may be, again, how they're dressing. Are they dressing provocatively? But not to say that, all girls that get involved in this dress provocatively. They may just look like your typical teen. So you have to, again, take a lot of these different things into perspective as far as looking at it. Just don't isolate, this is an isolated incident, but look at that whole total picture.
I want to make sure that we spend a certain amount of time on this, the safe home. Tell us a little bit about how people or victims of sex trafficking actually find their way to you all at the Porch Light.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, these are minor children that we serve in our home, and most of them being through that foster care system. So how they would come to us would be, maybe there's a law enforcement investigation, or there's a sting operation, and people are arrested, and these girls are picked up and they're identified. They have a tool, an assessment tool that, a series of questions that Department of Children and Families and Department of Juvenile Justice, and they will, go through these series of questions, and they will identify them as being victims of trafficking or suspected, that they are victims of trafficking. So with that, Department of Children and Families would become involved, and that's one of the things about the Safe Harbor Act. It took that view of them being the bad guys and they are being prostitutes out on the street. Well, that's not true. They're being prostituted. And so the whole language and how we view these children are being victims and not perpetrators. So we're not wanting to arrest them and throw them in jail. Again, they're vulnerable, they've been exploited, and somebody is making money off of them. So what we want to do is bring them into our home and help them through that healing and restoration piece. So law enforcement, through their stings or investigations, or these kids may even be picked up through shoplifting or stealing or fighting, because they have quotas they have to make. And so they have to have a certain amount of money to bring back to give to that trafficker, or there's consequences if they don't, like getting beat up. So they may go out to steal stuff so they can make money off of that to give to their trafficker. So they may get arrested for stealing. So somehow law enforcement gets involved through whatever investigation. Department of Children and Families then is contacted because they're minors, and then they reach out to placement, which we are contracted through an agency here actually it's in Bartow, and they reach out to us and say, we've got this child, she's 14, she's suspected victim of or identified victim of trafficking, and do you have a bed available for her? So what we then would have to do was, we can house up to 5 girls in our home. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but I always ask people, who wants 5 normal, healthy teenage girls in your home?
Right.
So now you bring trauma into this, and crises, and that brokenness, and they have so many needs to be met, So nobody says, okay, 5 is plenty. And so people reach out to us through these DCF or the placement agency and say, do you have a bed available for this child? And depending on if we have a bed available, different criteria has to be met in order for them to come to us. Are we a good fit for them in our home? Can we provide them the needs that need to be met in our home? Would she be a good fit? Because we can take children who are younger if we can meet their needs. So if she's 11, 12 years old and I have 4 17-year-olds, that might not be a good fit.
Right.
Also, where they're from, do they know each other? What about gangs? Is there a gang affiliation or their gang rival? Looking at their mental health history, their level of care. Are they on psychotropic medications? Are they taking those medications? Because if they're not, we're not at that level of care for that mental health piece if they're not taking their psychotropic medications. So education, their criminal history, so many things play into us looking at and assessing the needs of these children, and can we meet those needs before we can say, oh yeah, just drop them off. So that's how they come to us. We say, yes, we have an opening once we've assessed it, and then they're brought to our home, and then we can begin to work through that healing process.
So with the girls that that are placed in the home, do they have, do they stay there, or do they have the ability to just say, I'm done here, I'm gonna leave?
Okay. Well, that sounds like it's an easy answer, but there's a lot to that question.
Oh.
They are in care of Department of Children and Families. They are placed there. None of the children that have come to us are like, I want to be here.
Right.
I want you to help me.
This is the most exciting place ever.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, for a number of reasons. Again, remember, first of all, many of them don't identify as being victims.
Right.
That's my boyfriend. I do that because I love him. That's my parent. I love them. That's my grandparent. I love them. So I'm not a victim. I've not been exploited. I don't know what you're talking about. So there's that piece. In Florida, you cannot lock the doors. Right. And you think about that, we don't want to come across with some of the same behaviors as that exploiter has been doing, that trafficker has been doing. So we cannot lock them in. So can they come and go at their own will? Oh yeah, and they will run away. And people are like, well, they don't want to be there. Why would they run, especially at such a nice home? But you think about it, they don't know us. It's about building relationship with these children. And as adults, we know relationships take time. You just don't take to somebody, right?
Right.
Relationships take time, and they don't trust anybody. They don't know us. They don't trust us. So it's about us building trust and relationships with them. But during that time, think about it. What do you run back to? You run back to what you know.
What's comfortable.
What's comfortable. Even in that mental health counseling piece, if you think about it, because through their mental health counseling that they get, and they get that daily through groups, and they get it weekly, one-on-one, and we also do life skills. But it's during those times that they come to the point in their healing process that they do realize that they've been victimized and they have been exploited. Well, that hurts, and that doesn't feel good either. So what do? You have fight, flight, or freeze. And again, you run back because I don't want to face that. It's hard, so I don't want to deal with this anymore, and they leave. So, do they want to be there? Not necessarily. But eventually, through that mental health counseling piece, through the building of trust and relationships with our caregivers, who are all female caregivers in our home, and seeing, and what we're trying to do is a model a new way of life and give them those skills that they need to be successful in the community. They don't have any coping skills. Some of them, and most of them, are very angry, and and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But anger management, and how do you deal with that? Dealing with triggers, dealing with crisis. Every day is hard. Every day, so it's one day at a time. And managing those behaviors, teaching them new ways, modeling. We are a faith-based organization, so we model Christ. We do pray. When they come in, they may not be real receptive to that, but then when they see that, and they see how, we come together and we're showing them what real love looks like, because remember, that trafficker said he loved them, but he wants something from them, right? We love you, we don't want anything from you. And so we're showing them the difference. And so it's through that they come to see the difference, through that modeling of that. We do take them to church, they participate in youth groups, and we've had some conferences that we've gone to. We've had girls that have literally changed their lives around. And that's why we do what we do. And that's where the success comes from, because people will ask, how successful is your program? And I always have to redefine it for them, because it's like, okay, law enforcement gets them, they get picked up, they come to our home, we fix them, we teach them, they graduate, they move on, and they live happily ever after. That's not a realistic expectation, and that's not what success looks like in our home. Success looks like just those little changes of behavior. If that girl, there's a lot of language, and it's not pretty, but that's their norm. But because we don't speak that way, they see that we don't speak that way, and that everybody speaks that way, so then they stop using those big words that everybody cringes to. And then when they do drop that bomb, they apologize. That's success. That's success. One of our girls, she was adopted by a family. That was success. You know, we've had girls come into our program who've been pregnant, no prenatal care, nothing. We got them enrolled in, you know, different classes to help, and we found them a place where they and the baby, once the baby was born, could go to. That's success. So it looks a little different. And then you think about trauma, and I'm always talking about trauma because trauma manifests itself through behaviors. But trauma is lifelong.
Oh, yeah.
And you know, our victim advocate, our survivor that works with us, she just turned 58 this year. She was abused when she was 8 years old. She still suffers with trauma through, you know, PTSD, through depression, and when things get really bad, sometimes, you know, she even will cut. But, you know, she continues to get that ongoing mental health counseling, that support system, and wrapping that support around you, which is what we're trying to do with these children, wrap those support systems around them, teaching them a better way, a different way, teaching them, you know, life skills and how to cope and how to manage, because this will carry on with you for the rest of your life. Kind of starting back where we began, you know, what do you do with that trauma and how do you make that something good? So that's what we try to do with our children.
What about volunteers? How, if somebody wanted to help out, besides, obviously, I'm sure monetary donations are acceptable.
Absolutely.
But is there any other way for them to get involved with the Porch Light?
They can. Again, because we're a faith-based organization, I always am asking for prayer. Prayer, you know, not just for the Porch Light, but prayer for our staff, pray for our girls, pray for these traffickers, that, you know, that they will come to a point where they recognize what they are doing is wrong. You know, pray for these people that are buying sex from these children or from these people, that they would recognize. You know, pray for them too. You know, pray legislation, you know, that these laws and bills and things that are passed would be beneficial and helpful. So there's a lot of things that, you know, so I'm always asking for prayer. You mentioned financially. In order to sustain this type of program, it costs a lot of money because you just, I've hit on just a few of the needs that we have in our home. It's huge. It's huge. And you're raising these 5 girls is what you're doing. And so you just think about, you know, a household, and you know you've got staff, and it's 24/7 around the clock awake care, and the mental health counseling, and, you know, all those needs, medical and dental and eyes, and, you know, education, and just all of those pieces. So financial is huge. Volunteering, we do have volunteers that actually go out to the home. We also have volunteers that go out and advocate on behalf of the Porch Light, because again, that training, you know, we talked about what can we do for our kids and prevention.
Yeah.
They need to know what this is. They need to recognize it. It may not be happening to them, but maybe their friend. What do you do? Who do I call? How do I report it? What do I say? That's my friend, I don't want to tell. Are you really doing them any favors by not telling? You know, so educating our kids. So it's important to have advocates that go out and share. But if they're interested in that, they can go to the website, theporchlight.org. And on there's a volunteer application, and then there's that process where we actually will, you know, do background checks, we do fingerprinting, we will have you come in and actually talk to you about how would you like to be involved, you know, where are your gifts, you know, those strong things that you feel strongly about. Because you're wanting to, you know, we want to be able to meet your needs as well as you meet ours, so that everybody benefits from that. But going to the website and completing that application, that would be the very first step.
Well, gosh, I got to tell you, thank you so much for being here. I feel like I've lived a whole lifetime just in talking with you.
There's
and
a lot.
Some of those heavy topics, and I know that we've only touched on
the surface.
Just the surface.
Just the surface.
So that's all the time we have. But you can catch replays of this episode on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. You can also catch all of our previous episodes on the Polk Government YouTube page. I'm your host, Lauren Lingell, and thank you for joining me for Picture of Health.